We need to talk about Aaron Burr. Now I know what you're thinking. Oh boy, here it comes, a 20-minute hot take from Nella about that time Burr shot Hamilton. You'd be wrong! I'm not here to talk about a time a vice president of America shot someone while in office and how it wasn't even the last time it would happen. Look, I'm just saying, I have far more respect for Aaron Burr than Dick Cheney, because even if he had regrets, Aaron Burr actually meant to shoot someone that day. No, fundamentally, it takes two moronic purveyors of toxic masculinity to duel. If anything, I'm shocked it took him so long to shoot Hamilton in the first place. I mean, if Hamilton were alive and on Twitter today, oh my god. The hot takes, the call-out posts, the threads! No, as I've gotten older and wiser, my beef with Burr is no longer the duel. Maybe I need to take a more nuanced look at him. After all, he was only human. Maybe there were positives to him, just like any other mortal. Well, he really loved his daughter Theodosia, who he did tragically lose, as well as his grandson in a shipwreck during the War of 1812, so, that makes me feel bad for him. He was really into educating girls in the same manner that boys were educated, so I appreciate that. In fact, he and his first wife were so into Mary Wollstonecraft that they actually hung her portrait up in their house. For those of you playing the home game, Mary Wollstonecraft wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792, and if you'd like to learn more about that real writer, die dame, you should check out a little podcast of mine called The Apocalypse Book Club. She comes up in our second episode about Mary Shelley. Link below. During his self-exile to London, he met a young Mary Shelley who wrote a speech about the influence of government on the character of the people, and supposedly he was delighted by this. So that's adorable. He once set himself on fire trying to light a candle with gunpowder. Been there. He once spent the equivalent of $40 while in London, quote, like an ass, which I'm unable to confirm it, but it may have been in the purchase of a coconut. I get it. Retail therapy is so real and necessary at times. Okay, look, I'm not sure his trial for treason actually holds any water. In a game between who do you actually believe, Jefferson or Burr, we all lose. But he was a white man who went out west, looked at Mexico, and thought, I should rule this. And then he wasn't even the last white man to think that. When he was 77 years old, he married the fabulously wealthy Eliza Jumal, who was 58 years old at the time. He then proceeded to siphon off her wealth to try to pay off his own debts without, asking if he could do that. So 4 months into their marriage, she divorces him, and then their divorce was finalized on the day he died. All I'm saying is, don't mess with women named Eliza. Oh yeah, and he legally stole money that was supposed to be used to bring clean water to Lower Manhattan, and then he took that money and he started his own bank. Okay, so Drunk History has had 2 Burr-related episodes, and they still haven't touched on this, so I'm getting in at the ground floor while the getting's good, because Burr can burn in hell for what I'm about to tell you. Have you thought about where your water comes from? I have. So when I was growing up, we were taught about the aquifers on Long Island and how we personally had to protect them because the water had taken hundreds of years to percolate down to this underground aquifer, and that's why we shouldn't leave water running when we brush our teeth, which, thank you, Suffolk County Water Authority representative. We were in 4th grade, so I'm sure you simplified it for various reasons, but I'm pretty sure leaving the faucet on while brushing my teeth isn't the greatest threat to Long Island's underground aquifers. Just saying. But Nella, you might be thinking, why are you talking about aquifers under Long Island? Well, the point is, it's to emphasize that water has to come from somewhere, and that somewhere matters. For example, take Manhattan. And that's where Manhattan's water troubles began. You see, when you're surrounded by salt water and swamps, your wells aren't really the best. It didn't help that Dutch leaders had a hard time convincing the residents, no, you can't just dump dead animals in the broad canal or in the swamps and just dump your piss pots onto the street. Could you just not do that, you gross white people? You disgusting, awful white people. Even the English, who captured New Amsterdam and made it New York in 1664, had trouble keeping the streets clean. By 1697, Manhattan streets were described as nasty and unregulated, and the well water was described as brackish and so hard that soap couldn't dissolve in it. Which, if you've ever lived with hard well water, it's the worst! Throughout the colonial period, New York's hard, terrible, salty water was infamous, and was often compared to Philly's delightfully clear fresh water, which of course Philly's water was clear and fresh. They were pulling it out of the Schuylkill and the Delaware rivers, which are freshwater rivers. It's not like we can drink the water out of the Hudson or the East River. It's an estuary. We're surrounded by salt water. God, get it together, Karen! By 1744, a scientist who was really into public health, the Surveyor General Cadwallader Colden, finally succeeded in cleaning up Manhattan streets by banning tanners and wild hogs within the city limits. They were then forced to move north to the largest freshwater pond in Lower Manhattan, the Collect Pond. You see, the problem with the tanning industry is that to tan leather, you need stuff like urine and dog feces. And then you end up with a lot of really gnarly leftover waste that has to go somewhere. And those tanners started dumping it in the Collect Pond, which, as I stated, was the closest, largest, pristiniest freshwater pond just outside of the city limits. But just close enough that if they wanted fresh water, they could have grabbed it from there. Now, this wasn't really a period of history where you just drank water. What do you want to do, die? But you did need clean enough water to make things like beer and tea. Thus arises the popular tea water pump of early New York, which was a water pump located pretty close to the Collect Pond and which had the freshest, cleanest water available. It was the primo spot to get the clean water you needed for that cuppa you craved. However, not everyone lived close enough to the tea water pump to go there every day, so capitalism provided. Tea water men would collect water from the pumps and then deliver them throughout the city for a fee, of course. Think of it like the Nestle water delivery service of nowadays. If you had the money, you could just have the water delivered to your house for all your tea making and drinking needs. Now, if you didn't have the money, sucks to be you, you're just gonna have to be stuck with the gross, brackish well water. Because capitalism. By 1774, 3,000 houses were buying into this water delivery subscription service. But the wells continued to be maintained for things like domestic use and firefighting. By 1785, the industrial use of the Collect Pond had fouled the tea water pump nearby, and the water delivery clients noticed. Now, after the war, Manhattan's population boomed, which super stressed out the current well's water supply. Not only was there not enough water for things like drinking and cleaning and beer making, there was also not enough water for fighting fires. That's a problem. Something had to be done, just not right away. By 1791, New York City was growing to become the largest U.S. city in the nation, and it was dominated by the Federalist Party. Now, George Washington had been like, guys, seriously, no political parties, anything but political parties. That went flying out the window during his own administration because the Founding Fathers were just that petty. Now, the Bank of New York had gotten the state charter in 1791, and that was a problem for Democratic Republicans like Aaron Burr. You see, the banks were run by the Federalists, and they wouldn't give out loans to the opposition, because again, the Founding Fathers were just that petty. However, in 1798, yellow fever struck New York City, and by November of that year, 2,000 people had died. From that tragedy, The idea that the city needed clean water desperately was revived. Yes, yellow fever is not caused by bad water like, say, something like cholera, but clean water is good for public health. Look, whatever gets the city officials moving towards clean water is okay in my book, aside from the fact that 2,000 people had to die for that. Now, Dr. Joseph Brown, who just happened to be Aaron Burr's brother-in-law, had the idea of bringing fresh water from the Bronx River down to Lower Manhattan via aqueducts. And that would have been amazing! Had it actually happened? See, back then, just like now, there was a debate about whether water should be provided by the government or if it should be the responsibility of some kind of private company. Was water a right, or was it a utility you could pay for? Was it the responsibility of a government to provide its residents with clean water, or could somebody make a buck off of it? Now, Burr insisted that the people of New York wanted it to be a private company. But Albany was like, bullshit, we need receipts. So Burr ran back down to New York City and got together some Democratic, Republicans, and Federalists to agree that a private company was the only way to get the job done. So, funny story. At the time, Alexander Hamilton was disgraced out of public service and was just doing private legal work. Now, he was the one who suggested it would cost at least $1 million to build the infrastructure necessary to bring fresh water from the Bronx River, and that there was no way a city water tax would ever cover the cost of such a public service project. So he insisted that a private company was really the only and best way of getting the work done. He did, however, also point out that government oversight would be kind of important, and that the city should buy into shares of the company so that it had a responsibility and a stake in providing water to the city and stuff. And that's what Alexander Hamilton signed off on as a private citizen. And Aaron Burr ran with it all the way back to Albany. Hamilton's sign-off was the bipartisan approval Albany needed for a private company charter. But what Burr did with that approval was not what Hamilton had vouched for. You see, in the draft bill, Burr had a special clause that he knew people would choke on if they looked too close at it. The surplus capital clause. And be it further enacted, that it shall and may be lawful for the said company to employ all such surplus capital as may belong or accrue to the said company in the purchase of public or other stock, or in any money transactions or operations not inconsistent with the Constitution and laws of this state or of the United States, for the sole benefit of the said company. To quote the book Water for Gotham, before this clause, the power to do anything legal with a company's capital was unheard of in American or English corporate law. When confronted about it by Samuel Jones, an anti-federalist Long Island landowner who also was Hamilton's brother-in-law, everyone was related to everyone else by marriage. It was really weird. Burr's justification was that the Manhattan Water Company needed access to the surplus capital, as supplying water would not itself remunerate the stockholders. He was pretty much like, you fool, there's no money in supplying a basic human necessity to a population. So he insisted the company would have to have the legal right to take the leftover money to make sure the investors got at least something out of the deal. And Jones was like, yeah, that seems legit. And he let the bill pass with no amendments. Because Albany was so far away from Manhattan, no one could just run back down and double-check with Hamilton and the other Federalists about the changes Burr had made to the proposal. So Burr gets the draft bill rushed through a special committee, rushed through the assembly, and approved in less than 48 hours. Which is crazy! On April 2nd, 1799, the act becomes law, and the Manhattan Company is formed. Now, the Manhattan Company increased its capital requirements to $2 million, double what Hamilton had originally proposed. It then stacked the company's board with Democratic Republicans and Federalists who were only Federalists for the economic convenience. Wow, that totally never happens in New York politics anymore. Anyway, those inside traders snapped up the lion's share of stocks. The city's influence over the company was further reduced by limiting the amount of stocks the city could buy into the company. And the company was allowed to codify its own broad rights and its few obligations to the people of New York. let's go down the list and see exactly how they cut corners on providing fresh water to the people of New York, shall we? They didn't install a steam pump as proposed, they instead just used horses to run the pump, but to be fair, the nature of steam in that day and age wasn't quite up to snuff, and they ended up installing a steam pump anyway in 1802, so we'll allow it. They got a bunch of yes men to downplay just how much water the city actually needed per day. They even gave a smaller cost estimate than Hamilton's $1 million, which gave them a lot of leftover capital that they didn't have to use then for water. So they could justify running less pipes and making a smaller reservoir, so thanks, you useless toadies. The reservoir for the water that ended up being built could only hold 250,000 gallons of water instead of the originally proposed 1 million gallons of water. That's quite a cut. And let's be real, that amount of water could never serve the needs of the then city, much less a growing city like New York City was at the time. Now, also according to the charter that Aaron Burr had written, the company was allowed to dig up the streets to install the pipe, but were not responsible for fixing the streets afterwards. That was the city's problem. Well, that definitely saves the Manhattan Company quite a bit of money afterwards, not having to fix streets that they tore up, you assholes. They used wooden pipes, not metal ones, and they also installed the pipes very shallow, which means they were at risk for being contaminated by raw sewage. Delicious. Oh yeah, and do you know the best way they saved money? So instead of going and getting water from the fresh Bronx River, they just got water from Collect Pond, you know? The disgusting, fetid place that all the tanners dumped dead animals and waste into? That place! That's the water they were providing New Yorkers! So here were their justifications. One, they claimed that the Bronx River wasn't as clean as the Collect Pond, which... Two, they claimed that the aqueducts would freeze in the winter. Fine. Sure. Everyone knew the Collect Pond was fetid and awful at this time. They weren't fooling anyone. Dr. Joseph Brown, the guy who proposed the Bronx River in the first place, has the balls to admit, oh yeah, when we start pumping water from the Collect Pond, you won't be able to drink it because it's gross. But the more we pump, the cleaner the water's gonna get. He had the balls to claim this, just so that they could justify pulling from Collect water instead of up in the Bronx. I mean, who does that? What kind of awful, terrible, greedy person decides bad water is better than good water? That they'll just fix it in post? Meanwhile, the Bank of Manhattan Company opened September 3rd, well before the waterworks were completed. Oh, don't worry. They knew where their priorities were. It wasn't the water. Oh, but what was Hamilton's take on all of this? Well, Hamilton, he personally hated it, but legally, he defended it because it was technically legal. I'm glad you got shot. You and Burr deserved each other. You lawyer! By 1804, the Bank of Manhattan Company was firmly established as one of the nation's most powerful financial institutions, and for the next 40 years would claim fulfillment of their charter by providing pure and wholesome water against other would-be suppliers. However, the company's water was so bad that people didn't want to subscribe to their service. They just went back to relying on street wells and carted spring water. The water company struggled and lost money, but the bank was raking in money hand over fist. Side note, Burr took out a $48,000 loan from his new bank to pay off his old debts. However, he had to be removed from the board 2 years later because that debt had ballooned up to $120,000. It wasn't even a student loan, Burr. What were you doing? Buying wine like Thomas Jefferson? Oh, that was too loud. Oof. It would take the cholera epidemic of 1832 and a Great Fire to push the need for greater and better water to lower Manhattan, leading to the construction of the Croton Aqueduct and Reservoir, which was opened October 14, 1842. Aaron Burr poisoned New York City's water for 40 years. For a bank. A bank which then made a lot of money providing loans and insurance to slave owners, and who until 1923 would ceremonially pour water into pipes to maintain their charter as a water company. You would know them today as Chase Manhattan Bank. That logo? That's a cross-section of the wooden pipes used to provide their shitty water. Like they're proud of it or something. Forget shooting Hamilton. Let that be Aaron Burr's legacy. A thank you to my ear lenders, Chandra, Johan Gustafsson, Mario B., William Christopher, and Xantha Pink. I couldn't do this without your support and the support from all my patrons. As April is my 1-year anniversary of explaining things, be sure to join my Patreon at Nellacrinism for some patron-exclusive content this month. And as ever, if you support at the country folk level or higher and give me an address, you get a postcard. Unless you're Aaron Burr. Oh, who am I kidding? I'd send Burr a postcard too, but it would be strongly worded. Just give me that napkin real quick. Making a mess. Just like Aaron Burr! Tea. For the tea water pump. It's thematic.